Good morning. I'm coming to you from Tongva Land on the west coast of the United States, a country of increasing homelessness and poverty, where 4% of the world has suffered from 20% of the COVID deaths, where the effects of climate change, fires, floods, and hurricanes have rendered many more climate refugees, where women in immigration detention camps have had their uteruses removed against their will, where the streets of major cities are full of protests calling for justice, and where 90,000 are in solitary confinement in US prisons. I could go on. But first, I want to thank Vijay for hosting us today and for all he has done for peace with his life and his words. He is my hero. And for the No Cold War Coalition for inviting me to join this panel of global voices for whom I have the deepest respect. In 1968, I watched as friends were brought home in caskets from the Vietnam War and witnessed the horrific photographs of napalm burns on the bodies of Vietnamese children, and have been an anti-war, anti-nuclear activist since. Of course, I say with you, no Cold War on China. But the US has already begun a hybrid war on China in multiple ways, including dangerous military threats and provocations in Taiwan and the South China Sea. The US has attacked 80 countries overtly or covertly since World War II. It has dropped bombs on 39. It is the sole country to have used nuclear bombs. In these countries, the narrative is clear. Declare them a dangerous enemy and build a case through the US media that makes the false case the accepted narrative. US exceptionalism is a theory advanced by the US elite that the US is assigned the moral right to murder and invade others in pursuit of its right to global dominance. In the Cold War with Russia, the deceptive narrative was one of imminent attack, thus heightening the nuclear arms race and monies that belong to the people of the world to fight hunger and poverty. Those were used to line pockets of death merchants of the military industrial complex. Why is the US pushing so hard for a war with China? First, this didn't just begin with COVID or with the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei. This current effort begins with Obama's attempt to tilt towards the Pacific by creating the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was an attempt to isolate China from global trade. Today, the US elite are obviously terrified at the tremendous economic success of China. China is the world's leading solar power, wind power, water power, manufacturing power, and of 5G technology. During the last 70 years, China has educated its people and taken 800 million people out of poverty without invading other countries or enslaving other people. In the US, by contrast, poverty rates continue to climb. This is a section of US capital that resent China's leapfrogging, especially in areas of technology. We see this in the US forced sale and blatant theft of TikTok and the attempt to close WeChat, which are the continuation of piracy and plunder when it suits the Western powers. But Ed Snowden proved that in his release of US intelligence files, that it is in fact US technology companies that spy pervasively on citizens on nearly every country. China is not threatening the US militarily. China has one base abroad compared to 800 of the United States. China has not built up an offensive military power. Its strategy has been defensive. It was the Japanese who invaded China, which resulted in 20 million Chinese dead, and it was the Americans who led the brutal invasion of Korea. In 2019, China spent $261 billion on its military, while the US and its military allies spent $1.1 trillion, an amount 4 times greater. China's success stands in the way of US domination of the world. Sections of US capital and the deep state sadly have concluded that this makes China an existential threat. In the character of being a bully, the US falsely inverts reality and claims to be the victim, when it is clear to all that they are in fact the perpetrator of abuse. History has shown that China is not interested in either a cold or a hot war. The US is in a severe state of crisis. That crisis is economic, social, political, environmental, and moral. I live in a country where the death rates of COVID-19 for Black people are more than twice than that of white. I live in a country where to be Black is life-threatening. This is a country in moral decline. Declining empires inevitably seek external enemies for distraction. In 2003, my partner in CODEPINK, Medea Benjamin, and I drove across the desert from Amman, Jordan to Iraq just before the US invasion. Our question then was, why is the US government launching this war? There were obviously no weapons of mass destruction. Iraq had been crippled by US sanctions. Despite that, the Bush administration, with the assistance of the US media, was able to drive a narrative that frightened the American people and Congress and the Senate to go to war. Even as we and others warn the American people every day, all day, outside the White House and in Congress of the dire and inhuman consequences. After we failed to stop the war in Iraq, even as 20 million of us marched globally, I reflected on what I would have done differently. Even though I was working 24/7 for peace, there was a part of me that I thought going to war with Iraq was impossible. It was insane, immoral, unconstitutional, not approved by the UN, but it happened. So I vowed never to underestimate the depravity of those in power in the United States. The USA has always been based on the power of a white ruling elite. It is a power that has never been held to account for its crimes, shown remorse, or acknowledged the insidious damage to life it has caused. But nuclear war is not an acceptable outcome. The American peace movement has a tremendous responsibility to the world to undermine the threat to peace posed by the American empire. This task requires us to carefully identify all sections of the American people who are and can be mobilized against this. We are collectively working to enlist academics, students, Chinese Americans, unions, sections of American business to undermine the narratives that are being driven, to create a much larger movement to stand in the way of this irresponsible drive to war. What is needed is massive education of the world to understand the reality of China. I have been to Iran, North Korea, and China, and it is the people's narratives that must be told. Their stories change the hearts and minds that have been coerced by constant lies, intended to yet again frighten the American people to agreeing to war. We have before us the task to unite all levels of society, not on an ideological basis, but on a human basis to resist. We have to take this so seriously. And as peace activists work globally to call out other leaders to step up and speak up, fear shuts down good people. So it is our courage to speak out early, to make the space safe, to take on the early accusations of all that will be thrown at us. We cannot be thrown back on our heels in defense. We must stand boldly in the offense of cooperation, of diplomacy, of a future for humanity, of peace. We have to disrupt the narrative Trump is driving as he calls on generations of conditioning with his dog whistle tactics of the yellow peril and the red scare, and write our own beautiful narratives. The only response to global pandemics and climate change is cooperation. War is never the answer. Nuclear weapons are a crime against humanity, and anyone playing with that fire needs a timeout. Who polices the ones that call them the police of the world? We, the people, the global collective of humanity to which this violence has already been unleashed in acts of war that take place every day. We need to be cooperation, not confrontation. We need peace if there is going to be a future on this planet. China is not our enemy. Stop the lies, stop the hate. Thank you for being here and for your commitment to peace and for laying this groundwork for the global movement we need for cooperation and peace.